Good evening, friends and family, and thank you for coming to another night with Behind Black Business, sponsored by Repair, Restore, and Grow Black Communities. And we have another wonderful guest from the community, Mama Edie, who is a storyteller. Now,
Sure.
I know some of you, many of you know about storytellers, and some of you don't, but you're going to learn about storytellers tonight. And Mama Edie has been in our community for a long time doing this great work, and I want to thank you with your busy schedule for making time to come here tonight.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you inviting me. And the fact that both of us also happen to be speech pathologists makes it even better.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I will say, family, as you know, we're a nonprofit organization and we've been working to help our businesses in the community because we feel like it's our businesses that's going to help us to circulate our dollars, to have our dollars coming back to us in different ways in terms of services and resources. And so that's why we're putting our efforts and our dollars behind our Black businesses. And in particular, you know, we have a big focus on our bookstores. And we once had 22 Black bookstores in Chicago, and now we only have three. And there is one that is struggling right now, but they're fighting really hard to stay afloat, and that is Frontline Books. Frontline Books is located at 5206 South Harbor in Hyde Park. They've been there since 2004, serving the community. And we put on an event for them, a fundraising event last Saturday, and it was successful. Many people came through, and Maggie Brown and Robert Irving came through with a wonderful band and played some wonderful music. We had an outdoor event, and people just came and to celebrate each other and to celebrate this bookstore and support this bookstore. And we raised a little over $3,500. We were trying to get to the $4,000 mark, but that is going to be a help, and we have to continue to support Brother Sekou. We're trying to help get him dollars from different coffers within the city and at the state level. So we're still working on that. But we want you to continue to support Frontline. Frontline has an online presence. You can go to frontline.com. They are on Amazon as well, and they do their own publishing. So he had some wonderful books in there that he was giving away with those donations of $50 and $100. So if you get a $50 bundle, he had a Master Key, a Breath, and the Kabbalion series that you would get as a thank you for donating $50. And then for the $100 donation, there's the book bundles of Marcus Garvey, works of Marcus Garvey, several editions. So he was giving thank you gifts away because he does have a publishing and distribution center. Frontline has other items in their stores, some shea butters, oils, clothing items, jewelry, and many cultural items that you can purchase. But we are promoting reading, and that's why we put our bookstores on our website every month. and we do a book giveaway every month. And so the book that we're giving away this month is What They Never Told You in History Class by Indus Kamet Kush. Now, our featured bookstore for this month is the Underground Bookstore that is located on East 87th Street. And this is the book that Brother Yoel recommended that we present as our book giveaway. So all you have to do is go to the website and subscribe. And as one of our subscribers, you become eligible to receive a book. And so we've given some wonderful books away. And we take on the delivery cost. So you won't, there's no tricks behind this, or you're not going to get a cost. We just want you to subscribe because we know how important this knowledge is. I think if our people were more knowledgeable about our history, about our condition, about what's going on in our world from our perspectives, I think we would make some better decisions in regards to the things that we're doing right now. We would have a better understanding of what's happening to our schools. We would have a better understanding of what's happening in our political arena. We would just have a better understanding of what's going on with our health. And can't leave your life up to other people. You have to do some studying, and so you can come to the table with your own level of critical thinking. Our books are important for our children because they can see their own images in these Black books. So he has lots of children's books, and you will find those at Frontline, at Underground, and also Semicolon, that is located on the north side on Division. And then we also include Afriware. Afriware used to be located in Chicago, but they moved out to Maywood. But Sister Nzinga, she's a wonderful person, and she supports everything that we do in Chicago. As a matter of fact, Afriware and Underground were present at our event, showing solidarity with Brother Sekou. They had items there. Afriware had artwork, and Underground had books, and they shared their profits with Brother Sekou. And if you go back and look at some of our podcasts, this is how many of our businesses have thrived by supporting one another. And that's what we have to do. And finally, well, I'll say lastly, we support our Black-owned banks. The Southside Community Federal Credit Union, located at 54th and Wentworth, have been there for 20 plus years, serving the community, giving loans to people who couldn't go in other banks and get loans. And so that there was a time when that was a huge problem for Black people, and not to say it's changed, 100% at all, because we still do have problems getting the resources that we need. But we want you to support Black businesses, because supporting Black businesses is an investment in the Black community. So I wanted to get all of that out, and now we can begin our interview with Mama Edie, as called. And like she said, we're both speech pathologists. And I remember when she, I guess you left the board and the Chicago Public Schools, and she went on this journey. And I thought to myself, my, she is brave.
Well, I really didn't have much choice
Uh-huh.
at the time because I was also in graduate school out at Governor State.
Okay.
And so the time had come for me to move into my practicum experiences. And I'm sure you recall
Mhm.
that we had 5 of them. And so they were going to take me straight from January straight through August, because I told them I didn't want any breaks. When one stopped on a Friday, I wanted the next one to stop on Monday, because, like, y'all been real, but I'm tired of y'all and it's time to go.
Okay.
So, but because our position was considered temporary personnel at that time. I had to quit in order to do those practicum experiences, which of course are non-paid experiences. And it also happened to be the same time that my brother Danny in California had become very ill and wanted
Okay.
to come home and live with me. So
Okay.
suddenly I was going to have to support myself, my daughter, and my brother, and I had no job. And then storytelling came into my life. So,
Wow. Well, I would definitely like for you to tell us, how you, embarked upon that. What inspired you or influenced you to go down in that journey to that road of
yeah,
storytelling?
it's been phenomenal, and it actually began as being a speech pathologist
Hmm.
because most of the children that I worked with were African American or they were Spanish speaking children, and especially among, well, actually among both groups, they didn't know that much about themselves. They didn't know enough about themselves to really make themselves feel proud, especially among the African American children. A lot of the Spanish speaking children, they had the advantage of many of them having parents or grandparents who had just come from Mexico or had just come from Puerto Rico. And so that cultural connection was already there.
Hmm.
And there was a sense of pride that they had in either being Mexican or being Puerto Rican, and that kind of thing. But African Americans were still struggling with the idea of this African connection because as a kid growing up, and I just made 70 last year, I'll be 71 in June. And most of us um, grew up with notions of Africa being related to Tarzan, you
Right.
know, and uh, if the African people in the villages were having trouble and having problems and what have you, they didn't show the elders coming together and
Hmm.
discussing the problem. They showed this whole village being dependent upon this little white boy swinging from the trees,
Hmm.
beating his chest to come to save the day. Who would want to connect with that? Who would want to relate to that? So there was very little about Africa that we had been taught or presented that gave us anything to feel proud of. And so the skin color thing, I mean, I don't know how much longer we're going to be going on hearing people talking about, light skin and dark skin and good
Hmm.
hair and bad hair, and
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
and it's just been when we talk about the Willie Lynch syndrome, it is something that has just persisted. The idea that there was a man who was a planter in Virginia during the time of slavery, who came along and said, "This is the way you keep your slaves in check," And it was basically about the divide and conquer, pitting them against each other. And
Hmm.
the unfortunate thing there's a controversy that's been going on for a long time. Like, did he really say that? Did he really write the letter? Did he even really live? I don't
Sure.
care. I don't
Sure.
even care if he never really lived, because what he described and the way that people have been controlled, the way our minds have been controlled, is
Hmm.
real.
Sure.
I don't care who wrote it. It's real. And we unwillingly participate in self-fulfilling prophecy. We just continue to pass it on and on to our children because those are our perspectives. And our children don't necessarily need to be spoken directly to, for us to share information with them. They overhear
Hmm.
what we say, and they pick up our attitudes and our
Absolutely.
perspectives from what they overhear. And sometimes people, adults, think that children are not listening. They are.
Absolutely.
They are. They hear everything. And so I saw the struggle manifested as I was doing speech therapy, and
Hmm.
I came to recognize, um, especially this one this one situation that is funny and then it's sad. But
Okay.
there was a little boy about 9 years old. I think I might have shared this story with you before, but this little boy is about 9 years old, and little African American boy, one of the prettiest little black boys I'd ever seen. And his skin was dark and smooth and silky, and it was so rich. His color was so rich, and his eyes could melt you, and his smile was just so warm. He was the most beautiful child, but
Mm-hmm.
he came up to me, and he was so upset. And he was like, "Miss Armstrong." I said, "What's the matter, baby?" And so he pointed to this guy out in the hallway. He said, "That boy told me I'm so black, I look like an African."
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at him and I said, "Well, baby, did you say thank you?" And so he was like, "Huh?"
Yeah, absolutely.
He didn't know.
He didn't know.
He didn't know that he didn't have to be ashamed to look like an African.
That's right.
He didn't know. So it was like the idea that I would ask him, "Did you say thank you?" I said, "Oh, no, 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 no. We really got to do something here." So I started writing stories and plays and songs that helped my children see the beauty in them that I saw that they didn't know how to see.
That's right.
And so one of the stories that I wrote, in fact, and it's been published now. It's published in the we've got one of our national organizations, national storytelling organizations. This one is called the National Association of Black Storytellers, based in Baltimore, Maryland. In fact, I just spoke with one of the two surviving co-founders just a couple of days ago when I was out that way. Um, but they published a book, their first anthology.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a collection of stories from some of the different storytellers and what have you. So this particular story was published. It was selected for publication in that book, and it's called Boca Linda, the Shrinking Girl. And so with
Mm-hmm.
boca meaning mouth in Spanish and linda meaning pretty, I actually was inspired to write this story because of I had gone to Trinidad um, years ago with Urban Gateways, as a matter of fact. And it was their first field study excursion out of the country. And we had all kinds of workshops. We had dancing workshops and drumming workshops. I was doing everything. And we
Mm-hmm.
had history lectures and what have you. And one of the songs that I learned was a song that went like, it was called Boca Linda.
Mm-hmm.
Po, po, Boca Linda, po, po, Boca Linda, po, po, Boca Linda, what you do, my darling? And that was it. It would just go over
Mm-hmm.
and over again. So it was one of the songs that I brought back and I taught to my kids. And I would use it as a do as I say, a follow me,
Sure.
kind of thing. So I would choose some children to come up and do a movement
Mm-hmm.
and in effect set a good example.
Mm-hmm.
And because this Boca Linda, apparently she was a little girl who would get into some stuff every now and then.
Okay.
So I choose the child and say, okay, what do you want us to do? And so they might jump up and down or pat their heads, or, weep back and forth or whatever they wanted to do. And we would have to follow their example. It became clear to me that this Boca Linda was becoming a real child for me. And
Mm-hmm.
so I wrote a story called Boca Linda, the Shrinking Girl. And I described Boca Linda much like I described that little boy
Mm-hmm.
because he was my inspiration for it. And I describe her as Boca Linda live on the island of Trinidad, with palm trees waving in the breeze, and you can feel that breeze on your face. Oh, Lord have mercy. Got all
Right.
the beautiful sandy beaches and what have you. And Boca Linda was a beautiful child. She had skin that looked like soft black velvet, and she had eyes that sparkled like stars in the night sky, and she had a smile that made you feel good just to look on her. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
she was a pretty child. So it takes you through the description of Boca Linda, but with her name meaning pretty mouth, I crafted the story so that she would say some pretty ugly things with that mouth.
Okay.
And so, but when she would go and say mean things to her friends, after she would do so, she would begin to shrink.
Mm-hmm.
And so the story takes you through why it was that she was shrinking and what it was that she had to do to find out, what that was about. So I don't know if we have time. I can tell you that story. It's like about
Sure.
8 to 10 minute story, something like that. But
Okay. How
but
about
that's
we? Yeah. How about we save some time right towards the end?
yeah, towards the
We
end,
can
that's
share that.
fine. But that was the kind of thing that inspired me to start doing the storytelling. So what happened was that so it became so clear that they needed more than focus on their articulation and their language structure,
Sure.
stuttering and what have you. So I started incorporating concepts that they
Mm-hmm.
needed to know
About
about
themselves.
themselves. Yes,
Absolutely.
about
Absolutely.
themselves. I incorporated history
Mm-hmm.
into their lessons supported by their IEPs, So
Okay.
I put things like that in their IEPs. And in fact, I incorporated science, anything they were having trouble with.
Sure.
I incorporated science and math and I put everything in there. And so, I mean, nowadays, I mean, that was like in the late 70s. Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
didn't know they were going to come up with a fancy name for it, calling it, steam and, and what have you. So,
But you
STEM
know
and
what?
then STEM and,
You know what? It's so interesting that you're talking about it like this when you said about this shrinking person. Because I was
mm-hmm,
just having a conversation with someone about how terms are used, the different terms that they use to identify us as a people. We've been colored, we've
mm-hmm,
been Negro, we've
mm-hmm,
been people of color, you
mm-hmm,
know, we've been minorities,
mm-hmm,
we've been those who've been left behind.
mm-hmm,
Then
mm-hmm,
now it's the diversity, and every term it does seem to shrink us
hmm,
as a people.
hmm,
To make you less and less and less
hmm,
and less
hmm,
significant
hmm,
in the scheme of things.
hmm,
And the fact that you're out here, telling these stories to our children and helping them to understand who they are. Because I grew up watching Tarzan,
mm-hmm,
and,
mm-hmm,
and they didn't present the African as and with any intelligence. They didn't focus on the beauty of African people. The Black
mm-hmm,
African people were silly. They were scared. They didn't know anything. They were subservient.
mm-hmm,
In their own country. And
mm-hmm,
we know that this is not the truth of things, but that's
mm-hmm.
what they put out on that
Mm-hmm.
TV for our
It's true.
children.
It's true. And in fact, oftentimes you couldn't even really see the face of the African. But
Mm-hmm.
because in those days that we had black and white, we didn't even have color TV, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so it was black and white. But the lighting was always so that it showed up the white folks very nicely.
Mm-hmm.
But the black folks, it didn't matter what their features looked like. They simply represented black people. They simply represented the Africans. So it didn't matter what they looked like, if they had on big masks or if they had on, all kind of paint or if the lighting was just not there. It
Mm-hmm.
simply didn't matter. They didn't matter as people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting. Uh, I remember there was a school system out in the northwest suburbs, and they were trying to honor. This was, gosh, this had to have been at least 20 years ago, but they were trying to host a Black History celebration for the very first time,
Mm-hmm.
and the entire school was white, with the exception of maybe a few Asians from India or what have you. So, but there was maybe at the time that I was there, I don't think there were any African American children or children of African descent
Mm-hmm.
who claim African descent. We all know that we're all of African descent, but there
Sure.
were no children who would have looked obviously of African descent at the time that I was out there. So I found it interesting that this entirely white staff. It was actually a lady among the staff who decided, we really need to do this. We need to honor Black History Month. So she contacted me to come out there, and she was so excited and what have you. And she said, oh, please go into the teacher's lounge because we have everything all fixed up and we have food and you have to enjoy some of the food and we've got decorations. I said, oh, that's wonderful. So I went on into the lounge because I was there in plenty enough time and I could just hang out there in the lounge for a bit until they were ready for the performance. And I'm looking all around, and they had huge posters of different kinds of animals, from Africa and what have you. And they had hot dogs and pizza for the food. I thought they were at least going to order something from VB's, or get, maybe cater in some kind of African
Okay.
food. But they had hot
Mhm.
dogs and pizza. I'm like, okay. And there was a guy who, one of the teachers, he and his family had gone to Kenya, and so he had his computer set up so that the photographs were looping. And so I was standing there watching the photographs, and the photographs were all of his family and animals
Mhm.
and different scenes. There were no African people anywhere
Oh
in
my
any of
goodness.
those pictures.
See.
And so I did talk to the lady about it afterwards, and she said, what did you think? What did you think? So, well, I told her, I said, well, the photographs were really lovely. They were very, very nice. I said, but
Mhm.
if you decide to do this again, while the pictures of the animals were very wonderful, you may want to
Mhm.
consider including some pictures of the people.
That's right.
There are people who live in Africa too.
That's
you
right.
know,
That's
and so
right.
she said, oh my goodness,
Didn't
really? I said,
even
well,
think
I mean,
about that.
there were some people, but they were all his family. But
See?
nobody from the country where he had visited. And so we know that a lot of times when people think about Africa, the first thing they think about is animals. They
Well, if
either
you
think
look
about
at
animals or people swinging through trees, like
and
Tar said.
if you go to Kenya, then there's the Maasai tribe
Hmm.
who had this interesting relationship and understanding of the lions in their environment.
Hmm.
They
Hmm.
weren't fearful of
Hmm.
the lions, and they had to live, kind of side by side, with
Hmm.
them. But there was an understanding that they
Hmm.
had
Hmm.
with the
Absolutely.
lions, and so to even know that.
And there are actually a lot of indigenous people who nurtured relationships with the animals who they
Hmm.
lived with.
Absolutely.
They had to learn how to live with each other. They were in
Hmm.
the same space. They didn't have big stone fences and guns and all that
Right.
kind of stuff. They had to learn to live with each other, and they did learn to respect each other. And in most cases, those animals who a lot of people are afraid of,
Hmm.
the people who lived there had enough sense to know that if they stayed in their space and honored the space of the animals, they were going to pretty much be cool.
They were going to be
Because
cool.
animals would typically only get upset and start trying to, hurt somebody if they were encroaching on their space, which is the same thing that people did with other people,
Hmm.
encroaching in on their space. But then when we got encroached upon, we were the ones who were called the savages because we were trying to defend our space. So all of these kinds of things are ideas and knowledge that can be imparted to the children in storytelling. If I'm
Hmm.
telling animal stories, to give them a bit more
Sure.
about the animal, then, for example, there's a story that I tell about the farmer and the snake, and it's kind of comical, and but it's a story, it's a storyline that a lot of people are familiar with. That you're tempted for one reason or another. There's several different kinds of stories or adaptations of this theme or this motif, but you are tempted to pick up a snake or be in the space of the snake, and eventually you get bitten, and well, hey, you
Hmm.
so you
Right.
got to pay attention to the nature of things. So of course, when I tell the story of the farmer and the snake, and about how the farmer was being kind, and because he saw the snake laying there and he couldn't move. And he's laying there in the cold and the snow. And he said, well, let me put him inside my coat and, so he can get nice and warm and thaw out and go on back
Mhm.
home to his family.
Mhm.
Well, he was just being neighborly, So, but when, as the story proceeds, you find that the snake actually bites the farmer,
Mhm.
and the farmer, the snake says to the farmer, "Now, farmer, now, farmer, there's one thing you got to learn.
That's
You
right.
see, you got to learn to pay attention
Mhm.
to the nature of a thing. I
Mhm.
mean, if you know that there are people who lie all the time, then why you gonna believe them, farmer?
Mhm.
And if
Mhm.
you know that being around somebody is likely to get you in trouble, then why you gonna be with them, farmer? You gotta pay attention to the nature of a thing. I mean, you knew I was a snake when you picked me up.
That's right.
Now, naturally, when I tell that children to little kids, and
Mhm.
I say, did anybody learn a lesson out of that? And of
Mhm.
course, the little ones are going to say, never pick up a snake, you know. So, so I say,
Sure.
yeah, okay, that's true. But then
Yes.
the older ones are encouraged to look at a deeper meaning, to look at the importance of being careful of who you trust, the importance of observing
That's
the
right.
things around you, observing the people around you, and observing this behavior that is probably going to be pretty constant, so being careful of
Absolutely.
who you trust. So those kinds of things, can be taught.
And
The history can be
this
taught.
is this is why reading and storytelling is so important
Hmm.
because okay, you're learning history, you're learning life lessons.
Hmm.
I think
Hmm.
that's part of a problem that we're having now. Everybody, the young people especially, they go from A to Z. There's no
Hmm.
there's no in between. you
Hmm.
know,
Hmm.
and running over people out here on the roads. Somebody
Hmm.
honks your
Hmm.
horn. They want to run you
Hmm.
over and follow you home, and all of this is
Hmm.
going on here in Chicago.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so, from reading these stories, like you're teaching a life lesson. In addition to history, in addition to learning about other cultures, in addition to going to places that you have never physically been to
Hmm.
or may never physically go to,
Hmm.
but a
Hmm.
book and a story can take you there.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and
And
I've been to some interesting places. Got a chance to. In fact, the year was it? Yeah, it was the same year that I went to Trinidad.
mm-hmm,
I That was like 1980 something, 84, 86, and I asked around to see if there were any schools for the deaf, and there was one school for the deaf and blind.
mm-hmm,
And so I was able to arrange to go there, and I did some storytelling, for the deaf and blind. So that was a really wonderful experience. And in Ghana also, there in Ghana, up in Mampong, up in the mountains, there was a school also for the deaf and blind. So I got a chance to go and do storytelling there as well. And one of my most interesting experiences was going to do a presentation in Iraq. Well, actually, I had gotten invited um, to participate in an international peace conference in Iraq in
mm-hmm,
2017, and it was a brother from Iran and his wife, who was from Lebanon, and his name is Nader Talabzadeh. And peace be upon him, he just actually recently passed away. And
oh,
yeah, so we're still kind of trying to deal with that. And his wife Zainab, sweet, sweet spirit, is having a very difficult time. But they had been pulling together these conferences for several years,
mm-hmm,
and people have been invited based upon the work that they did as related to peace and social justice. And so someone recommended me as a participant on this
mm-hmm,
um, conference, based upon the stories that I tell and the workshops that I do and things like that. Um, and that was pretty amazing. There were about 30 of us who represented about 15 different countries. And
Mm-hmm.
among the countries were Congo, India, Mexico, Bolivia, Ecuador, Turkey, Russia, Iran, Iraq, and several others. And one of the interesting things, one of the very moving things about it, there were a lot of moving things about it, but was that the 8-year war between Iran and Iraq
Mm-hmm.
just had passed not that long before we got there. And so we had these young men who were there as our guides and protectors
Mm-hmm.
because ISIS was still in Iraq at the time. So a lot of people thought I was crazy when I said I was getting ready to go to Iraq. They're like, "What? You going where?" So and but as it happened, they were in a different area that was far away from the cities where we happened to be. And so we were able to go there and to be able to be with people from all those different countries,
Mm-hmm.
different faiths. Some were Christian, some were Muslim, and some did not claim any particular religion or ideology. There were people who were civic leaders. There were spiritual leaders. There was one brother who I met, who was the Ecuadorian ambassador to Bolivia, and
Mm-hmm.
we met because he couldn't speak English, but I speak a little Spanish, and
Okay.
and he was friends with there were two young ladies from Bolivia who were television journalists, and that was one of the moving things that happened. The three of them were standing off to the side, looking a little bit shy and sheepish, and
Mm-hmm.
looking like we were in the restaurant of the hotel where we stayed. And it was obviously they were looking around like, well, where should we go? And, we can't talk to anybody. So I saw them, and I had gone over there by myself, and so I didn't know anybody either. So I went over to them and I said, "Hablan español," and they were like, "Oh, like hallelujah, somebody else can speak Spanish." So
Okay.
we started hanging out together, and we called ourselves La Familia. But one of the funny things that happened was that when we were sharing a meal with one of the videographers, because they were documenting this whole experience, and so there was one particular videographer who was from Iran, so he spoke Farsi. Now I don't speak any Farsi, but we decided we're gonna sit down and we're gonna share a meal together and we're gonna have a conversation. And so here they are speaking no English, only Spanish. Here he is speaking Farsi, tiny bit of English, and here I am speaking no Farsi, but a little bit of Spanish, and I got a crash course in translation. I'm like, okay, dijo que bloody, bloody, bloody. And they say, okay, Mama Edie, pregúntale so and so and so. I'm like, okay, they said it. So it was a
So,
riot. And then
so,
sometimes,
so
like,
let me ask
where
you.
girl, I'm telling where my Spanish would fail. I say, es correcto. And they'd be like, no, Mama Edie is like this. I'm like, okay. And we would just have a big laugh about it. But the main
So,
thing that came out of that
okay,
was
go ahead.
that the realization, the reminder that our languages don't have to keep us apart.
Sure.
They don't have to keep our differences, don't have to keep us apart. Our languages are not a good excuse for us not to come to the table and share our stories and try to figure out, how do we heal from here? How do we keep what has happened in the past from happening again? How do we teach our children a new way? How do we remove these shackles from our minds so that we can learn a new way, so that we can
Mhm.
teach a new way, so that we can teach in a way that is not intended to support the status quo, but so
Sure.
that we can teach them what it is that they need to know, what they need to know to lift themselves up and to lift all of us up. And that potential is there, but we have to teach them how to see it because they don't see it. And that's what storytelling can do.
Now, did you have an opportunity to tell stories while you were there? Did they ask you to do that?
Yeah, I did. Actually, the opportunity was there. It wasn't like they just, because I asked them. I said, "Well, what do you want me to do?" When they,
Sure.
I in fact, I almost spammed the email invitation, because when I saw it, I'm like, it's like, oh, hi, Mama Edie, my name is, Zainab, and I live in Iran, and we're going to have this conference. And I'm like, this cannot be real. And they're talking about paying for everything, for the
Hmm.
flight and the food and the hotel. I'm like, please. And something told me, don't spam it just yet. And I think the next day or so, the sister who recommended me, her name is Cecile Johnson, wonderful sister. Has got a, you may be familiar with it. She has a program called the African Development Program, uh, African Development, African Development Agenda. That's what it is, African Development Agenda. And so it's a program where she is pulling together different organizations and individuals to talk about strategies for how we can support each other's efforts to lift each other up, so that
Hmm.
further down the road, global children of African descent can see an improvement in their quality of life. So, but I did get a chance to tell some stories, but not because they specifically asked me to perform, but
Hmm.
because people just, there were moments when somebody who was a singer, they just broke out in song. There was a group, young brothers who, you, if you're not familiar with, you would be very interested in them. They are called hip hop detox,
Hmm.
and they do hip hop in a very, very detoxifying way. They're consciousness raisers with their hip hop music, with their hip hop performances and what have you. So there were people there who did many different things, but one of the biggest things is that we participated in a pilgrimage there,
Hmm.
that they estimated over 45 million people who were there for this pilgrimage in Iraq, that was to honor the memory of Imam Hussein, who basically championed causes for social justice and had been murdered. He and his followers, 72 of his followers, were ambushed coming from the cities of Najaf to Karbala. And so there are people who've been making this pilgrimage since the 1100s when it happened,
Okay.
and it happens, still today. So
This
it's been
sounds like
mind expanding. Yeah.
that would sound like a really wonderful experience that you had. Now you mentioned that you have an organization here in the United States of Black storytellers.
There-
And then how many storytellers are there? Like
well,
Black
there.
storytellers.
Well, first of all, we've got one in Chicago
Okay.
called Ashe, the Chicago
Hmm.
Association of Black Storytellers. And with Ashe being a term from the Yoruba people in the Yoruba language, that basically means amen, or it's an
Hmm.
affirmation
Sure.
that what was just spoken was really true.
Hmm.
And we call it Ashe, the Chicago Association of Black Storytellers. So we're now about 20, 21 years old, I think. And
Oh.
so, yeah, so I was the founding co-chair along with
Hmm.
Kucha Brownlee, and so that was our brainchild, and what have you. So and it's still going strong, with monthly meetings and on second Sundays, and that kind
Hmm.
of thing. So and the if I can offer the web address.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, that web address is www.asheblackstorytellers.org, and Ashe
Okay.
is spelled ASE. It looks like ace, but in Yoruba, if there's a little dot up under the S, it gets an SH sound. So, but you don't see the dot, but it's spelled ASE, Ashe, blackstorytellers.org. And
So, so
mhm,
is this a place if someone were looking for a storyteller? Is this a place
mhm.
that they would go to?
Yes, yes, they could
Hmm.
do that, because there are some of us, everybody in Ashe is not a professional storyteller. Some
Okay.
people joined Ashe just because they enjoy storytelling,
Hmm.
and they want to just come and hear some good stories, and they want to support the concerts that we put on.
Oh.
There are others who are actually doing the work professionally. And so, those of us who wanted to accept this opportunity, they pay a special fee in order to be included in the directory
Mm-hmm.
on the website and that kind of thing. So, and then there's another, the national organization is called the National Association of Black Storytellers. And so Mama Linda Goss is the elder who I just spoke with the other day. And she's one of the two co-founders, and Mother Mary Carter Smith made her transition some years ago. But they had gone to a conference, a festival of
Mm-hmm.
an organization that is now called the National Storytelling Network. And that was based in Jonesboro, Tennessee, but it's now based in Kansas City. Um, and so they went, and but there were hardly any Black people there at all. And so they
Oh
looked
my
and said, wow,
goodness.
this is really wonderful. We need something like this for Black folks.
Sure.
So they started, so
Mm-hmm.
with the support of their sorority, they started.
So how many do you have nationally? You said you have about 20 here in Chicago and
There are actually, let's see, that was about 21 years that we've been together in Chicago. The membership for Ashe is somewhere between 25 and 30.
mm-hmm.
I think we probably have on a regular basis anywhere between 15 and 20 active members, who
Okay.
are actively, really doing the work and what have you. But on the rolls, we've got probably somewhere between, excuse me, between 25 and 30. Um, the national organization is probably close to about 300. That's my best estimate now. So I
Mm-hmm.
was the national membership chair of that organization for about 9 years, but I kind of stepped back and
Okay.
started doing some focusing on some personal goals and what have
Okay.
you. So,
So could you give us kind of a rundown for people that are interested in
mhm.
storytelling or what they could be looking for like the rest of this year here, in Chicago?
Well, one of the things that they could be looking for is if they're interested in doing storytelling
Mm-hmm.
or learning about how to do storytelling, I do storytelling coaching.
Okay.
And so they could contact me at Mama Edie 4 at gmail.com. So that's MAMAED, just one D, IE. Some people want to call me Eddie, make me Eddie May with two D's. So EDIE4 at gmail.com. So that's MAMAEDIE4 at gmail.com. And I'll do either individual coaching that's gone really well or group coaching as well. So
Mm-hmm.
we can talk about the particulars of that. Um, if they're interested in simply experiencing storytelling, there's storytelling going on everywhere. And so all they have to do is Google storytelling or a
Mm-hmm.
storytelling concert or storytellers, and something's gonna come up. And there are monthly storytelling events that go on. There's an organization that actually was a springboard for many of us as professional storytellers. It started out as Illinois storytelling. Period. It was Illinois storytelling, and it was started by Jim May down in McHenry County, Illinois. Wonderful man, very, very kind, big spirit. But it now functions as Storytelling, Illinois Storytelling Illinois Storytelling. Yeah, just it's still basically just Illinois storytelling, I think. And but they can look up illinoisstorytelling.org
Mm-hmm.
.org, and they can find storytellers there. So they can find storytellers of many different cultures, on that site. So there's, I'm telling you, Google is my friend. You
Google is
go
your
to Google
friend.
And if you want a storytelling concert in, Milwaukee or whatever, just put storytelling Milwaukee and something's going to come up.
This is
So
gonna come up.
yeah, there's no problems finding storytelling activities and what
So
have you.
mostly when you think of storytellers, you think of storytellers coming to schools, quite naturally. What other kinds of venues would you see storytellers?
Well, one of um, one of my most interesting experiences, one of my very first corporate experience, which who knew, So, and this was in 1990 something or other. Um, I had gotten a call from the personnel director of Argonne National Laboratories, and at the time they were being challenged because the majority of the people there at the time were Euro Americans. But all of a sudden, there were people coming from Africa, coming from the Middle East, and coming from Asian countries, and it was a challenge. And so the
Mhm.
personnel director called and asked me if there was anything I could do through storytelling. And I said, could be. She said, have you done anything like that before? I said, well, no. She said, well, are you willing to try? I said, I'm willing to try if you are, but it was
Mhm.
amazing. It was absolutely amazing. And they were mandated. They had to be there. Some
Mhm.
situations in the corporate sector, you can come if you want to. This one, they all had to be there. And you could tell that they were coming down the hall kicking and screaming practically, figuratively. And you could see the ones who really, really didn't want to be there. But by the time it got into them telling their stories of where these feelings were coming from, what made them upset, were they inspired to respond the way they did? What prompted that? What did they think? Where do they think that came from? And what would they do differently now that they've been through that experience? Now that they are here talking to somebody from this other culture who can explain what they thought they knew, that they
Mhm.
found out that they didn't know, how might they do differently now? How might they communicate differently? Even if they didn't change their mind, how could they at least be more respectful in their approach? And so I was able to use storytelling in a healing, bonding kind of way. And it was amazing. And so that experience led to them recommending me to Inland Steel
Mhm.
shortly after, who's having the same kind of problem. And so that was how my start in storytelling in the corporate sector got started. So now we've got the buzz term, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and
Mhm.
everybody's doing it type of thing. But some storytellers are moving more into that arena as well, finding stories, finding storytelling. mm,
As a way
Being
of
a
healing.
finding storytelling, a storytelling environment being one that can feel safe, that feels safe enough for people to be a bit more vulnerable than they might be otherwise,
Mhm.
and then to really open up and say what they really need to say and deal with it, and deal with it. So that's been very interesting. And the Art Institute, um, some years ago, the Art Institute, that was my beginning, well, my professional beginning, I guess, of doing multidisciplinary performances, because they asked me to. There's an African American artist by the name of Horace Pippin who depicted typical African American life during the turn of the century, and he died in like 1939, and so they asked me if I could create a performance around his images at the Art Institute. But his images, I said, well, are his images going to be where my performance is going to be? They said, no, it's going to be on the other side. And I was like, well, that ain't going to work. So I asked them if they had slides. So I took the slides and I ended up creating a story. I put them in some kind of order. I asked the brother, I said, brother, he said the name of the exhibit was "I Paint My Heart."
Mhm.
And in one of the articles that they sent me, I asked him, send me whatever you got. I wanted to know about him and who he was. And he said, I paint my heart that he wasn't one much for words. So I sat in the middle of my living room floor with all these images scattered around me. And I said,
Mhm.
brother, if you find me worthy, speak through me. And you said you're not much with words. Give me the words. What speak to me? Let your heart speak to my heart, and I'll try to put it out there. It was like it was like the floodgate
Oh,
open.
wow.
I had a pen. I was writing so fast. It was like my tongue was hanging out the side of my mouth, just writing so fast. So I ended up blending a slideshow where I was on the side operating the projector, slides going. I'm telling the story as the slides are going, and then I moved forward and I had my shekere because I'm a percussionist too, so I've used the beaded gourd, and I said, and there was a picture of an old man holding a little white child on his lap. And I said, yeah, I remember old Uncle George, too. We used to call him. And he had just come over from Africa. And he even remembered how to make some of them African instruments. Oh, wait a minute. I got one right here. I picked up my
Yeah.
check, went to the center stage. I'd already cued the people to bring up the lights, brought up the lights. I
Mhm.
went into fungal lafia. There was interaction and stuff. Lights went back down when I was done, went back over to the podium, and we continued with the slideshow.
So
So it's
are most of your stories pre-written or story? You're telling stories from books, or are most of your stories that you created? Or
these days, many of my stories are stories that I've created.
uh-huh.
And when I started out, and this is pretty typical when people start out in storytelling, they often start out with folk tales, which can be really, really wonderful because they
Mhm.
have wonderful messages in them and what have you. Um, but over the years, I've been writing my own. So stories like Bo Kalinda, the Shrinking Girl, is a fictitious story, but there are
Mhm.
also stories that I've written like the one that I was sharing with you about the time when I went to visit the plantation, the George Washington plantation, when I was 13 years
Ah,
old.
well, I tell you what, we're going to. I'm going to let you talk about that, and I want you to end our program with a story.
Okay,
Okay,
okay. Well,
so I'm going to let you
okay.
talk
Well,
about that.
that story is really very short. Um, but I'll go into it, and then if it looks like there's time for another little short story, then I'll do that.
Okay.
But because it's not a really happy story, and you might want to end on a happier note. But
Yeah.
it's an important story, I think. So, and I wrote about it, and I called it the hauntings of a teen. Was it? I call it the hauntings of a teenager on a southern plantation.
Okay. Now,
Hauntings, hauntings,
before you get
hauntings.
started,
Yeah, yeah.
so people know, because I visited this place as well, George Washington's plantation in Mount Vernon, right? And it's his plantation. And what's so interesting about it, or what was so impactful, is that everything that was there during slavery, during that time, is still there. His house, the kitchen, which was a separate house, and they said they didn't have that next to it because if the kitchen burned down, they didn't want the house to burn down. And
Right,
see the
right,
furniture, so people was much smaller because the furniture was smaller. Even
right.
his washroom, his outdoor house, which looked really nice. They called it the necessary. And
Mm-hmm.
then there's this area where there are no names, but they're
Mm-hmm.
acknowledging that the slaves were there. You don't know if
Mm-hmm.
anybody's buried there or anything, but there's just acknowledgement. And then there is the slave quarters that is
Mm-hmm.
there. And it looks just like in my mind, I imagine, when I would
Mm-hmm.
read a lot of Frederick Douglass's books, and he was
Mm-hmm.
describing the slave quarters,
Mm-hmm.
it was
Mm-hmm.
just as I had imagined, the overseer's
Mm-hmm.
house. So,
Mm-hmm.
the history that has been preserved there,
Mm-hmm.
you couldn't help but have a spiritual experience. So I
It's true.
want you to go on and tell us about that.
Yeah, and I have to say that I've been to several other plantations by now,
Mhm.
including the slave dungeons in Ghana, which that's
Sure.
another story,
Sure.
but a similar kind of experience. But George Washington's, I couldn't get off the tour bus
Mhm.
because of my experience. So what had happened was that the majority of the people, I was 13 years old, and I had gone to visit my sister Diane, who was living in New York, going to school there, studying radiology, and she was staying with my aunt Bill, Aunt Wilhelmina, and so she decided to take me to D.C., meet her friends, and see the monuments, and blah blah
Mhm.
blah. So we're on this tour, and we're on the bus. Most of the people on the bus seem to be elder, white ladies, and door to the bus, and I sat just about a seat or two behind that back door, and I was seated by the window. And so when the tour guide was talking about the gardens and what have you, he said, so you all can get off and you can go around and visit the gardens and what have you. So all the little ladies, they were all excited about seeing the pretty flowers and everything, and they were getting off the bus, but where the bus stopped was right beside this tree. And as I looked at this tree, I saw someone hanging there. And it's not like they were solid, but I knew with every fiber of my being that somebody had been hung from that tree. Now this was before I knew. I'm 13. This was before I knew the story of how people would be hung from trees at the edge of the road as warnings to others to not try to run away. I didn't know that story at the time, but I felt I felt this someone hanging from the tree, and it made me so sad. And so Bill got up to get off the bus, and she said, "Come on, Edith, don't you want to, go and see?" And I said, I can't go." And she said, "Well, what's wrong? What do you mean?" I said, "I just can't go." And so she sat down beside me, and all of a sudden I just began to cry. I just began to cry. And she put her arm around my shoulder and she said, "Shh, it's okay." And she just rocked me. And thing is, Aunt Bill was not a really soft, motherly, nurturing kind of person. She could cuss like a sailor, and she was like, "Okay, we're gonna do this." Blah, blah, blah. That was totally out of character for her. But it's like she knew. I didn't have to say anything. It's like she knew that I must be going through something. And we never got off the bus. We just sat on that bus and waited till the little ladies came and got back on, still chattering, very happy that they had a visit to this plantation that only brought me sadness.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, but um, but I can, if you got a couple of minutes, I can abbreviate
Okay.
a little story that is this is a it's actually a Cuban folk tale called The Barking Mouse.
Mhm.
And so um, there was a family of mice, mamá ratón, papá ratón, y hermana, or sister, y hermano, or brother. And mama said one day, "Ah, familia mía, mi familia, mira el cielo hermoso. Look at that beautiful sky." She said, "Yo tengo una buena idea. I have a good idea." She said, "Vamos a comer en el parque. We're going to go and eat in the park." And so the children were excited and they said, "Hooray." And so mommy started making all kind of wonderful food. She made some pollo frito, she made some fried chicken, and she had some frutas or fruits.
Mhm.
She had all kind of good stuff, and she put it into a big canasta or a basket. And Papi came along. He said, "I don't know." He said, that canasta is going to be poquito pesada. It's going to be a little heavy, pero no te preocupe. Don't worry about it. Porque mira mis músculos grandes. Look at my great big muscles. Mommy said, no, papi, go on. So papi came along. He picked up the canasta and off to the park they went. And so she spread out the blanket and they put all the food on the blanket. And she said, come on, children, estamos listos. We're ready to eat. And they said, oh, mommy, we don't want to eat right now. Vamos a jugar. We want to go and play. So they went to an area that had a big, beautiful meadow. And they started playing spin around. And whoops, they fell down. And then they got up and they started playing football, or what many of us call soccer. But then all of a sudden, Hermana looked around and she said, Hermano, he said, sí. She said, yo creo que el señor gato vive aquí. I think Mr. Cat lives here. He said, no te preocupes. Don't worry about it. Yo no tengo miedo del gato. I ain't scared of no cat. And so she said, well, me neither. So they played and played and played. They played and played and played. But you know who came along? El señor gato. Da-doo, 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 da-doo. Oh, Lord have mercy. He looked at those kids, licked his lips, and said, and they were like, we're out of here. And so they took off running, corriendo, corriendo, corriendo. And then they were calling to their parents. They were like, Mami, Papi, ayúdanos, ayúdanos, help us, help us, help us. Running, running, running. The cat was coming after them. When they got back to where Mommy and Papi were, they were sitting up there smooching, besando, besando. And so they were like, Mami, Papi, mira, el gato está aquí. Mommy said, ay, Dios mío, what are we going to do? Papi said, no te preocupes. Yo no tengo miedo del gato. I'm scared of no cat. She said, okay, then do something. And he did. Do you know what Papi did? He ran and hid behind his wife. Ran and hid behind his wife. Hermana ran back there. Y hermano ran back there. And so all of a sudden, there was a cat getting cerca y más cerca, closer and closer, until Mommy looked at that cat. And she said, what am I going to do? But she got an idea. She looked at him and she said, woof. That cat jumped back and she said, I think it's working, y'all. And so she barked again. And so and he jumped again. She said, come on, y'all, bark with me. So hermana y hermano and papi, everybody started barking. That cat took off, corriendo, 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 running away. And when he got far enough away, that little mouse family, they were falling out laughing. They were laying out on the ground, had their little legs all kicking up in the air.
Oh
When they
my
finally
goodness.
collected themselves and they were getting ready to go home, and they started packing up everything. And as they were walking down the road, Mommy said to the children, she said, you see, children, it's like I always say, es muy importante para hablar otro idioma. It's very important to know how to speak another language. And that's the end of that.
Absolutely. That was a wonderful.
Thank you. And I
Oh,
love that
goodness.
story because it makes the same statement that I made earlier when
Sure,
I was talking about my experience in Iraq, that
sure.
our languages don't have to keep us apart.
That's right.
They can even save your life, like it did in the case of that story. And also, when I do storytelling so that um, the children of the African diaspora in particular recognize our connections to each other. And
Hmm.
so if I can tell that story, blending Spanish and English, and if
Sure.
there's Spanish speaking people in the audience, they're like, she sees me.
That's
She
right.
sees us, you know, and she
Hmm.
cared enough to try to learn our language. This is so cool. And I've had people come up to me and say that, like, so where are you from? Are you from Puerto Rico? Or you why do you speak Spanish? I'm like,
Hmm.
I got Spanish speaking friends. I thought it'd be pretty cool to be able to speak to them. And they're like, that is so cool, you know. So
Sure.
it's another way to link us together, and then we get a chance to explore enough to many of our stories are much more the same than they are different. So you know,
Absolutely.
I call us African cousins that just got dropped off at different ports.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well,
Yeah,
Mama Edie, this has been wonderful having you on.
thank
I love
you.
that story, and I love storytelling. I love to listen to stories. and it's such a wonderful experience for our children, and we're so
Yeah.
what can I want to say? The word I want to use, but we are so happy to have you
Thank
and
you.
have our other storytellers out here because hey, adults and children, just the children,
Hmm.
adults need
Absolutely.
mhm,
Absolutely. And if
healing.
and if I could just share this one little point, one of the to when I was teaching the children the importance of learning their own histories, I
Mm-hmm.
wrote a story about my grandfather who was a Pullman porter that
Okay.
turned into a rap poem, which pulls in A. Philip Randolph in the history and being called George and all these things. And it's in a rhythm like this that I ended up doing for the National Railroad Retirement Board. So to give them the example of writing a story about my grandfather,
Cool.
to give them the message that you got people in your own family. You
Mm-hmm.
don't have to go way back. You
That's
got people
right.
in your own family who
Right.
have done significant things, who are
Mm-hmm.
probably doing significant things do now.
That's
And
right.
you can do significant things too. And you don't have to wait until you grow up.
That's right. That's right.
You can do them right now.
Your life is a story.
That's right. That's right.
Absolutely. Well,
Hmm.
thank you so much. I'm sure everyone has enjoyed you.
Thank you.
And how can you be reached again?
I can be reached by email is best at Mama Edie 4. That's MAMAED, just one D, IE4 at gmail.com.
Okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
This interview will be archived on our website. So for
Mm-hmm.
those who didn't get a chance to come in live tonight, it will be on our website, Keep Forever. And I want to thank you again for coming. Don't forget, family, to tell your friends to subscribe to our website, and they may have an opportunity to win a book in our book giveaway because we do believe in stories here, and we do
Sure.
believe in reading. And
And
so, thank
thank you for
you.
your work in that regard too. It's wonderful.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right, so we're going to say good night.
Okay, good night.